The old soldier gave them 3 wishes and begged them not to use even one. Outside, the night was cold and wet, but inside the small parlor of Laburnum Villa, the blinds were drawn and the fire burned brightly. Mr. White and his son, Herbert, were playing chess, while Mrs. White knitted peacefully by the hearth. Mr. White played recklessly, grumbling about the storm and the muddy road to distract Herbert. It did not help. "Checkmate," Herbert said. Mrs. White smiled over her knitting. Then the garden gate banged loudly. Heavy footsteps came toward the door. "There he is," said Herbert. Mr. White hurried to welcome the visitor. A moment later he entered with a tall, broad man, whose face was red and whose eyes were small and bright. "Sergeant Major Morris," he announced. The soldier settled beside the fire. After his third whiskey, he spoke of 21 years in India, of wars, plagues, temples, fakirs, and dangerous journeys. "I'd like to go to India myself," said Mr. White. "Better where you are," said Morris. "I should like to see those old temples and jugglers," Mr. White continued. "What was that you mentioned the other day about a monkey's paw?" "Nothing," Morris replied quickly. "A monkey's paw?" Mrs. White asked. "Just a bit of what you might call magic." The 3 Whites leaned forward. Morris reached into his pocket and drew out a small, dried paw. Mrs. White recoiled, but Herbert took it and examined it curiously. "To look at, it's only an ordinary little paw," said Morris. "A very holy fakir put a spell on it. He wanted to prove that fate ruled people's lives, and that anyone who interfered with fate would suffer for it. The paw gives 3 separate men 3 wishes each." Herbert smiled. "Why don't you have your 3, sir?" The soldier looked at him coldly. "I have," he said. "And were they granted?" Mrs. White asked. "I did have them granted." "Has anybody else wished?" she persisted. "The first man had his 3 wishes. I don't know what the first 2 were. The third was for death. That is how I got the paw." The room fell silent. "If you've had your 3 wishes, it's no good to you now," said Mr. White. "What do you keep it for?" "Fancy, I suppose." Morris looked down at the paw. "It has caused enough mischief already. Throw it on the fire." He suddenly tossed it into the flames. Mr. White gave a startled cry and snatched it out. "If you don't want it, Morris, give it to me." "I won't," said the soldier. "I threw it on the fire. If you keep it, don't blame me for what happens. Put it back like a sensible man." "How do you use it?" Mr. White asked. "Hold it up in your right hand and wish aloud. But I warn you of the consequences." Mrs. White rose to prepare supper. "Couldn't you wish for 4 pairs of hands for me?" They laughed, but Morris caught Mr. White by the arm. "If you must wish, wish for something sensible." Mr. White pocketed the paw. Over supper, Morris told more stories, but before leaving for the last train, he again urged his friend to destroy it. As the door closed behind him, Herbert said, "If the tale about the monkey's paw is no more truthful than his other stories, we shall not make much out of it." "Did you give him anything for it?" Mrs. White asked her husband. "A trifle," said Mr. White, coloring. "He didn't want it, but I made him take it. He pressed me again to throw it away." "Then we're going to be rich, famous, and happy," Herbert said. "Wish to be an emperor, father. Then you can't be henpecked." He darted around the table while Mrs. White chased him with an antimacassar. Mr. White drew out the paw and looked at it doubtfully. "I don't know what to wish for," he said. "I seem to have everything I want." "If you cleared the house, you'd be quite happy, wouldn't you?" Herbert asked. "Wish for 200 pounds. That would just do it." Mr. White smiled at his own foolishness and raised the talisman. Herbert sat at the piano and struck a few solemn chords. "I wish for 200 pounds, said Mr. White distinctly. A crashing chord burst from the piano. At the same moment, Mr. White cried out and dropped the paw. "It moved," he exclaimed. "It twisted in my hand like a snake." "I don't see the money," said Herbert, picking it up. "It must have been your fancy," Mrs. White said anxiously. Mr. White shook his head. "There's no harm done, but it gave me a shock." That night, the wind rose, and Mr. White started at every door that banged. Herbert joked about finding the money in a bag upon their bed, with something horrible watching from the wardrobe. Later, alone by the dying fire, he imagined a dreadful, simian face in the flames. With an uneasy laugh, he reached for a glass of water, and his hand closed instead around the monkey's paw. The next morning, sunlight filled the breakfast room, and the paw lay carelessly on the sideboard. The family laughed at the previous night's fears. How could wishes be granted in these days? Mrs. White asked. And if they could, how could 200 pounds hurt you? It might drop on his head from the sky, Herbert replied. As he left for work, he called back, Don't spend the money before I come home. It may turn you into a mean, avaricious man. His mother laughed and watched him disappear down the road. The day passed quietly until Mrs. White noticed a hesitant stranger at the gate. He walked away 3 times before finally approaching. She hid her apron beneath a cushion and brought him into the parlor, where he avoided their eyes. He seemed nervous and avoided their eyes. I was asked to call, he said at last. I come from Ma and Megan's. Mrs. White rose sharply. Is anything the matter? Has anything happened to Herbert? There, mother, Mr. White said quickly. Sit down. You've not brought bad news, I'm sure, sir. I'm sorry, the visitor began. Is he hurt? Mrs. White demanded. The man bowed. Badly hurt. But he is not in any pain. Oh, thank God, she cried, then stopped, as the meaning of his words reached her. Her hands trembled as she grasped her husband's. He was caught in the machinery, the visitor said quietly. Caught in the machinery, Mr. White repeated, staring blankly out of the window. He was the only one left to us, he said. It is hard. The visitor explained that the firm accepted no responsibility, but wished to offer compensation for Herbert's services. Mr. White released his wife's hand and stood. How much? He asked. 200 pounds. Mrs. White screamed. Mr. White smiled faintly, stretched out his hands as though he could not see. The funeral came quickly. Then the Whites returned to a house filled with silence. For several days, they lived as if waiting for something else to happen, something that might lighten the grief that was too heavy for them to bear. But no miracle came. Their expectation faded into the hopeless resignation of the old. About a week later, Mr. White awoke in the night and found himself alone. From the window came the sound of his wife weeping. Come back, he said tenderly. You'll be cold. It is colder for my son, Mrs. White replied. Her sobs faded. Mr. White drifted into uneasy sleep. Then a wild cry awakened him. The paw, Mrs. White screamed. The monkey's paw. He sat up. Where is it? What's the matter? I want it, she said. You haven't destroyed it? It's in the parlor. Why? She laughed and cried at once. The other 2 wishes. We've only had one. Wish our boy alive again. Mr. White stared at her in horror. Good God, you're mad. We had the first wish granted. Why not the second? A coincidence, he muttered. Go and get it, she cried. Wish. He tried to reason with her. Herbert had been dead 10 days. Worse still, the body had been terribly mutilated. He had been able to recognize his son only by his clothing. If he was too terrible for you to see then, he said, how can you bear to see him now? Bring him back, she cried. Do you think I fear the child I nursed? Mr. White went downstairs alone. In the darkness he felt his way to the parlor and found the paw on the mantelpiece. A horrible fear seized him. If the wish were granted, would his mutilated son appear before him before he could escape? He returned to the bedroom, pale and trembling. Wish, Mrs. White commanded. It is foolish and wicked. Wish, he raised his hand. I wish my son alive again. The paw fell to the floor. Mrs. White ran to the window and raised the blind. Mr. White sat frozen, watching her wait. The candle burned low and went out. At last, with a sense of relief, he crept back into bed. Neither of them spoke. They listened to the clock, to a stair creaking, and to a mouse moving inside the wall. Then Mr. White, needing a candle, struck a match and went downstairs. At the foot of the stairs, the match went out. He reached for another and heard a knock at the front door. It was quiet and stealthy, scarcely more than a sound in the darkness. The matches slipped from his hand. The knock came again. Mr. White fled upstairs and closed the bedroom door. "What's that?" Mrs. White cried. "A rat," he answered shakily. "It passed me on the stairs." A loud knock shook the house. "It's Herbert!" Mrs. White screamed. "It's Herbert!" She rushed for the door, but Mr. White caught her arm. "What are you going to do?" he whispered. "It's my boy. Let me go. I must open the door. For God's sake, don't let it in." "You're afraid of your own son?" she cried, struggling. "I'm coming, Herbert." Another knock. Mrs. White broke free and ran downstairs. Mr. White followed to the landing, pleading with her to stop. He heard the chain rattle back. He heard the bottom bolt being dragged from its socket. "The bolt!" she cried. "Come down. I can't reach it." Mr. White dropped to his hands and knees, searching frantically for the monkey's paw. If he could find it before the thing outside came in. A storm of knocking reverberated through the house. He heard his wife drag a chair against the door. He heard the bolt creak as it moved back. Then his fingers closed around the paw. With all the strength left in him, Mr. White breathed his third and final wish. The knocking stopped. Its echoes still trembled through the house. Then he heard the chair pulled away. The door opened. A cold wind rushed up the staircase, and from below came a long, terrible cry of disappointment and misery. Mr. White ran downstairs. His wife stood beside the open door, staring into the night. Beyond the gate, beneath the flickering street lamp, the road was empty and silent. This was The Monkey's Paw by W. W. Jacobs, first published in 1902. What would you have wished for?